Hi YouTube, Belton here. Today, I'm going to teach you guys about one of the most important elements of an action RPG, the items. More specifically, we're going to talk about how to navigate the process of rating an item, what's important when you're looking at that item, and how to go about creating these various types of items yourself. The two processes we're going to be talking about colloquially are referred to as itemization and as crafting. Before we jump into things, if you find this video helpful, dropping a like below, leaving a comment, or sharing this with a friend helps me in the pursuit of both a dream and a passion of mine, making content for this game. This video took me more than 16 hours to write and to put together, which is more than any video I've ever done before. I hope that effort and quality shines through, and if you want to see more of this in the future, consider subscribing to the channel. If one of your great joys in PoE is the items like myself, promise you won't regret it. So the first thing I want to talk about here is why I'm making this video. Several weeks into early access and not right away at the launch. This centers around three main reasons. First, I wanted to play the game at launch to gain a firm understanding of this subject matter, both in theory and practical application. I did not want to advise you guys from a place of ignorance. Secondly, as with the pursuit of excellence or high performance in any sphere, time is a resource in short supply. In particular, due to the snowballing nature of a marketplace with finite resources experiencing a hard reset when those resources are inextricably linked to the core pursuit in the game. Every core pursuit, that is. And finally, number three, and this is a bit of a longer concept, but I'm a firm believer in the idea that the solution to incorrect speech is more speech and not imposing limitations on speech. I know buzzwords like misinformation get thrown around a lot these days, however, and they've seemingly become a commonplace accusation in this game, or at least they were a couple weeks ago, and the community surrounding it since the launch of early access. While I do not necessarily disagree with the points made criticizing inaccuracies and falsehoods presented by what are largely newer players to the franchise and the game, I do also understand that most people, especially those with pre-existing audience, carrying over from other games, are not necessarily acting in malice when creating content for PoE 2, but rather are simply sharing their experiences, successes, and recommendations to their audience. An audience who expects them to do just that. Where the issues arise, in my eyes, are when the people apply practices commonplace in other games' content ecosystem that are generally not accepted by the PoE community. A community that has built its own culture, norms, and practices over a 12-plus year existence that started off with an independent studio using its Reddit page as an official feedback forum where lead developers would actually talk directly to their player base. Content creators in their communities in PoE care so much about this game because they help shape this game into what it is today. In a way that people new to the franchise are likely to be completely unfamiliar with. Especially if these people are coming from games like Diablo, made by a company that is notoriously known for doing the exact opposite. On one side, you have new players coming over thinking that a bunch of sweaty neckbeards are gatekeeping and trying to stifle new voices. And on the other side, you have those who see a mass influx of gaming and content tourists whose visibility, when combined with a propensity for algorithm-friendly clickbait titles, a practice that is very common in many other gaming communities but reviled in Path of Exile, and a limited understanding of the subject matter that they are discussing, does not help inform new players and convert them into PoE players, but rather takes advantage of their ignorance. The flavor of the month that is PoE, experiencing some newfound mainstream success, happens to be largely a knowledge-based game, and thus presenting as an expert who can share some of that juicy knowledge will help drive ad revenue, certainly. And these types of folks might see words like best or number one simply as a marketing tool to drive clicks, compared to PoE veterans who see them as an objective statement objective statements that are factually supported by data. Therefore, view their misuse as an attack on a space that has been largely self-supporting for over a decade. This is not just a fuzzy sentiment, by the way, but a literal statement of reality. Many of the core features of Path of Exile were not made by GGG originally. They were made by passionate community members and adopted as core features by the company later on. Path of Building, Craft of Exile, the wiki, the trade website, in-game price checking, premium stash tabs, bulk trading, the auction house, direct whispers straight from the trade site, loot filters, and more, believe it or not, were all community creations. Since the community helped in this game's development so much, while occupying such a small niche in the overall gaming market for so many years, it is out of a protective instinct that they love the game of, and the love that the game that, sorry, and the love of the game that PoE veterans dogpile on this type of misinformation. They don't want new players to quit the game thinking that it's due to bad design, when in reality, a big creator who they implicitly trust has simply led them down a path that has led to that outcome, and they are having a bad time. The scenario I just described is the impetus for making this video. Tying it back to my first remark, I do not want to stifle new voices or discourage people from making content in this game. There is room for all, and I, along with most people who love this game, want to see the franchise and its community continue to grow. Rather than making a series of reaction videos where it might seem mean-spirited, like gatekeeping, or just an excuse to dunk on noobs, or, in effect, limiting speech under the pretense of providing some sort of guardrail against misinformation by effectively canceling problematic voices, the intent of this video is to allow correct speech, as it were, to rise to the top in the marketplace of ideas. Now, correct speech, you might say, who determines that? That's quite the claim, Belton, which is an entirely valid argument and a legitimate question. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. As discussed in this video, we're talking about crafting and itemization. By the end of this video, my aim is to achieve 3 separate goals. Number 1, you will walk away confident in the fact that the information provided is correct, and the source of that information, myself, has provided the evidence to match the extraordinary claim made a moment ago. Ergo, I will qualify my expertise or my history as an expert on this subject matter. Number 2, you'll understand the basic concept of itemization, the different categories of items, and how to read and understand any item that you find. And number 3, you will have a functional understanding of crafting in Path of Exile 2. The what, where, when, and why in a 30,000-foot view of how it is done. By the time the video finishes, it is my goal that you will be informed enough to make a decision as to whether or not it is or is not a system you would like to learn more about or explore further in the game. Now, allow me to qualify myself. It would be hypocritical to point out the issues I just did and then simply transition into a guide with "trust me, bro" as the only measure of its validity. For anyone new to the channel, and especially those new to the game, I'll take a moment to qualify myself and my opinions before taking you on this journey that is crafting in PoE. For those of you familiar with myself or my content over the years, feel free to skip this part. So for the new guys, my name is Belton. I've played Path of Exile for 12 years since March of 2013. It is the only game that I have played in that time, that is until recently with the release of PoE 2. I have been making content for PoE for over 10 years, beginning with written guides, Reddit posts collecting data, and forum builds. Eventually beginning to stream starting around 2015, and making my first YouTube video guide 1 year later in 2016. The only break I ever had in that time was when I took 3 years off of streaming and Path of Exile at large to voluntarily enlist in the Army Infantry to fulfill a final wish from a passing family member, returning shortly after I was released as COVID hit in 2020. I have logged just under 30,000 hours of /played time in that time span. I have done and completed every facet of the game, including getting 40 out of 40 in over 20 different challenge leagues, winning races, earning my own demigods items, and have completed race seasons earning alt art items. These, however, are not what I'm known for, and are likely things that even many of my long-term viewers did not know. This is because I have had, above all else, a very specific area of focus for the vast majority of the time I have played in both personal pursuits and in terms of content. These are twofold. Number 1, generating, demonstrating, and sharing strategies to maximize the creation of in-game wealth with a specific focus on how to do so outside of relying on drops or from maps or from mobs. And number 2, creating the strongest and most valuable items to ever exist in Path of Exile through crafting. Using those items as a tool to explain and share my passion for the ever-evolving mechanics of the discipline. With both, I have done so transparently, uncovering new mechanics, strategies, and functional interactions along the way. I have never gatekept any new discoveries, nor have I ever broken the terms of service in pursuit of those aims. My account has never once been flagged, warned, suspended, or banned in the 12 years I have played, and is still in good standing. I have actively taken a stance against RMTing in the game, and have spent multiple years trying to combat it and other forms of illegitimate activity. Publicly, I have done so, often at a great personal expense, often from pushback by those whose bottom line is impacted by my claims. I have over 300 video guides, 100 written guides, and over 10,000 hours of live-streamed VODs documenting and corroborating any and all of my gameplay. Going specifically into sort of some resume points, as it were, the biggest ones. Number 1, I have crafted over 260 different mirror items, which I will explain what that means shortly for those of you who are new. This is the most of any individual player in the history of Path of Exile. 9 of these so far have been made in Path of Exile 2. I have earned approximately 25,000 to 30,000 mirrors of Calandra in my time playing PoE. Number 3, I crafted what is widely considered to be the single strongest item ever made in the history of the game, Load Thunder. Number 4, I have made at least one mirror item in over 20 different leagues, spanning over a decade of gameplay, and at various evolutions and stages of crafting development. Number 5, I have done over 20,000 individual mirror services. Number 6, I have done 30 plus world first crafts. Number 7, I have 15 plus all-time best in slot items crafted. Number 8, I crafted the single most expensive item ever made at a cost of 363 mirrors. Number 9, I have live streamed every single league since the start of 2015 and have never made less than 2 mirrors within the first week. My personal record was 5.5 mirrors by the Sunday of opening weekend, so approximately after 60 hours. The most I've ever made in a single sort of streaming session, I always stream 6 days on, 4 days off, sometimes 7 days on, 3 days off. But I often set challenges for myself before starting a new rotation. And the most I ever did in one of those was 85 mirrors of profit in 6 days without entering a map or using mirror crafting fees to generate currency. This was during Affliction League. And that was in liquid mirrors, not in overall value. The most amount I've ever made in a single day was 146 mirrors of profit in 24 hours. And this was when Crucible League merged with Standard League. Number 12, the longest recorded and streamed individual craft in history. I spent 608 hours on a single item. And number 13, I have been the first to discover or make public multiple in-game interactions or mechanics that had otherwise been unknown, including discovering corrupted implicit item levels, item level restricted crafting, recombinator proc rates, synthesis implicit data, various beast crafting mechanics, and showcasing and alerting the community NGGG support to multiple exploits and in-game bugs. These can all be independently verified through multiple resources I listed earlier. Pardon me for a second. All right. It's not my intention to self-aggrandize and diminish the achievements of anyone else, or dismiss the efforts and contributions of any other player or group in sharing this. PoE has an incredibly diverse ecosystem of content creators and behind-the-scenes innovators that have shaped the collective understanding of the game over time. Rather, I want to provide a context and framework to anyone new to the channel and or game to help inform your decision-making with respect to acting upon advice or information I provide. There are a lot of guides out there, many of which have conflicting information and sometimes just outright falsehoods. Unfortunately, it is those that are most likely to be seeking out beginner's guides that would also be the least likely to be able to distinguish between what is good and bad information, as it were. Luckily, as it pertains to crafting and itemization, the vast majority of it is quantifiable and measurable, with mechanics and interactions that are data mined and thus have objectively better or more correct ways to assess them. While limited, there are still some aspects of crafting and itemization that are subjective. When those are discussed, I hope I have demonstrated sufficient reasons to qualify my perspectives and to trust my opinions. If ever I make an incorrect calculation or misstate a mechanical interaction in a video I post, I welcome any corrections in the comments. If I have made an error, it will be swiftly corrected with a pinned comment and an edit or correction footnote in the description. I am proud of my track record in this respect. However, I am certainly not infallible. Recognizing that, I am not too proud to admit a mistake if or when one happens. Alrighty, now, let's get down to itemization, baby. Part 2, itemization. The same way that you must learn to walk before learning to run, or learn to read before learning to write, So too must you as a PoE player learn about itemization before you can learn to craft. Itemization, loosely defined, is the basic system through which you acquire, modify, and enhance items in the game. Since Path of Exile 2 is a loot-driven game, this is a core part of gameplay and is incredibly important to understand, whether you intend on crafting down the road or not. Itemization can be broken down into several key elements. The first of which is called item type. These are the different categories of items or slots of gear. These categories are weapons, offhands, armor, jewelry, flasks, jewels, and charms. The first four of those that I mentioned, weapons, offhands, armor, and jewelry, comprise a subcategory that are referred to as equipment. This term is rarely important. However, if you see the term equipped items, it only refers to these and not flasks, jewels, or charms. Furthermore, equipment cannot be swapped around during boss fights. Okay, so weapons, offhands, armor, and jewelry are all categories of items that include specific types. These are, with weapons, you have axes, bows, claws, crossbows, daggers, flails, which haven't been released yet, maces, quarterstaves, scepters, spears, which have not been released yet as well, stabs, swords, traps, also not released, and wands. For offhands, you have foci, which is the plural of focus, quivers, and shields. Shields, which also count by armor as the way. By the way, sorry. Woo, slurring today. Armor. Body armor, boots, gloves, helmets, and shields. And as we mentioned, shields are also offhands. Now, the next category of things that we're going to discuss is item rarity. Items in Path of Exile come in 4 different rarities. These can be identified or denoted by the color of text when looking at an item and by the amount of modifiers on the item, with the exception of uniques. The 4 types of items are normal. These are the most common items that will drop, and they have a white text and no explicit modifiers. Magic. These items are the second most common and will drop with blue text. They can have up to 2 explicit modifiers, but will always drop with at least 1. It is possible to see magic items with 0 modifiers, but that is only obtainable by using annulment orbs on a magic item. Rare. These are the bread and butter of Path of Exile itemization. Rare items will appear with yellow text and can have up to 6 explicit modifiers. Identifying an unidentified item, rare item, will always yield at least 4 modifiers. An alchemy orb used on a normal item will always give 4. It is possible to see rare items with less than 4 explicit modifiers. However, these will only be obtained through crafting currencies used by another player and will never appear so naturally. It is a core design philosophy in Path of Exile that rare items should be the best and strongest items in the game. While they are not necessarily the rarest in terms of how often they drop, the potential ceiling on them is almost always the highest of any item type. When we eventually discuss crafting, it will almost always be on one of these items. So if we take a look at the accompanying slideshow here, the item on the left is the silver charm is a normal item. As you can see, it has the white text, and it does not have any modifiers on it. If you look at the second one here, the perforating emerald of poisoning, it is a jewel, and it will have the 2 modifiers here, 1 prefix and 1 suffix. And the third item here, the yellow text, is the rare. And this will have 3 prefixes on the top, 1, 2, 3, and 3 suffixes, 1, 2, 3. Now, we'll get into the 4th type of item, which is a unique. As you can see, the 4th one on the chart to the right there. Unique items are the rarest items in the game in Path of Exile 2. They differ from other rarities in that every unique item has a guaranteed set of predetermined modifiers and properties that exist within a predetermined set range. There are some unique items that are used in almost every build, as they have unique effects. There are some unique items used in almost every build. Not necessarily the same ones, but every build for the most part has 1 or 2 different uniques, as they have unique effects available nowhere else on regular gear. These effects can radically change the way that a build is played. Sometimes you will hear these referred to as build-enabling items or build-enabling uniques. Despite the fact that these are the rarest in terms of how often they drop, they are often of poor comparable quality or strength to well-rolled or crafted rare items, with the exception of those that have the unique properties we just mentioned. Excuse me again. All right. The next thing we're going to discuss are item modifiers. Item modifiers are the most important part to understand when it comes to itemization. These are the various lines of text that appear on any item that you find or trade for. They are what give items their functionality and what determine the strength and purpose of each item. Modifiers are broken into several categorical terms. These are base modifiers, affixes, prefixes, suffixes, implicits, explicits, enchantments, and corruptions. Before continuing, by the way, a reminder for any new players. To view all of the pertinent information when looking at any item, press and hold the Alt key on your keyboard while hovering over it with your cursor. If you simply hover over it, it will not give you all of the information you need to properly assess it. So, first one we're going to talk about are base modifiers. And these are the base modifiers are the values that exist on an item, on a normal version of any item when it is found. These will include much of the pertinent information in determining whether or not an item is worth crafting upon, as well as providing basic information about the item. The first thing we're going to learn about is the strength of the base item and the type of the base item. So in this case here, we can see we have the expert. Now in Path of Exile 2, they made this quite simple because they just have an escalating tier of these. So you have the normal version of a zealot bow in this case, then you have advanced, and then you have expert. So expert being the highest. Then you have the base type items. So with the number 2 here, we can see that this is a bow. And then if we look at the name again, we can see the type of bow that it is. So in this case, expert is again the highest categorization of the bow type zealot. And so that's the two things that you can gather there. Then we're going to find out the item level, the item level of the item. And the item level is incredibly important to understand because it will determine the total available explicit modifiers that an item can have. So here we can see that this bow is item level 82. Now, moving on past that, armor will display as the base defensive stat of the item based on its attribute alignment. Strength is associated with armor, dex is associated with evasion, and intelligence is associated with energy shield. Hybrids will comprise a mix of two of those. So if it's strength int, it would be armor and energy shield, and vice versa, etc. Martial weapons will have a base damage value range, attacks per second, and a base critical strike chance. This is what we can see on the Zealot bow here, where we have the physical damage range, the base crit of 5, and the attacks per second being 1.2. Wands and staves come with an implicit modifier that grants a specific spell. This spell is used instead of a default attack. Scepters have no local stats and instead roll modifiers that affect all allies. Shields are an item class of offhand equipment that count as both armor and offhand. They provide base defenses based on the attribute alignment and a chance to block. The base will also grant the skill Raise Shield. A focus is an item class of offhand equipment that provides energy shield. Unlike a shield, however, it does not provide any block chance. A quiver is an item class of offhands that may only be used when paired with a bow. It provides no defensive stats, however, will always have an implicit modifier. Jewelry have implicit modifiers that provide baseline bonuses, that being belts, rings, and amulets. Another thing that can show up as well is quality. And actually, before we jump into that, if you take a look here, the ornate belt, a jewelry type, the 10% reduced charms used is the implicit. And if we look at the sacrificial mantle of the Drake, we can see the 16% quality there, which I'll describe in a second, as well as the body armor type quality, and then these are the base armor values there. And now we'll describe the quality. Quality can appear on all equipment, charms, flasks, and skill gems, with the exception of quivers, jewels, belts, and support gems. Quality will improve the item based on what type it is. Here is what 1% quality does for each item type. Martial weapons, you will get 1% more to the local physical damage. Wands and scepters, 1% to inherent skill quality. Scepters, 1% more to spirit. Armor, 1% more to the base defenses. Amulets and rings, 1% increased magnitude of the modifier value as determined by the catalyst that is used on it. With flasks, you'll get 1% more life or mana recovery. With charms, 1% increased duration. And with skill gems, it will vary depending on what the skill gem is specifically. Quality is not automatically applied to items, although items may drop with quality. If an item drops with at least 1% quality, it will have the prefix superior when you find it on the ground. It will not retain that prefix when you pick it up in your inventory, however. Currency items will add quality to their corresponding item type, and they cap out at 20%. With the exception of gems, flasks, and caster weapons, which can be corrupted to 23%. However, their base value without a corruption is still 20. The next thing that we're going to see on the base of the item is the level requirement. Now, this line of information has forever been immortalized by Elon Musk, and every time I post an item or a video, 65 of you think it's hilarious to be like, but it's only level 77. Incredibly original, but keep it coming. This modifier has no relevance to anything other than when you can equip the item as a player. Typically as well, higher level requirements will have stronger base values of the variants that we just discussed so far, but it's not always the case. And another thing that we'll see, and the last thing that we'll see here, are the attribute requirements. So attribute requirements are the base attributes required to equip an item. These are the strength, dex, and intelligence. The attributes required will correspond with the type of item and vice versa. So for example, bows will be dexterity, wands will be intelligence, two-hand maces will be strength, and we already talked about the different armor types. Oh, good. I am cotton mouth today. Sorry, guys. All right. So, there are a few more further terminologies in PoE 2 that are used to categorize different types of modifiers. I will explain those now. If you ever hear the term affix, affix is a blanket term used to describe either a prefix or a suffix. Explicit modifier. A modifier that appears on an item of non-rare quality. Basically, it can be anything that is not one of the ones that we just discussed on the previous slide there. And implicit modifier is an innate modifier that is present on all rarities of an item by default. For example, if we look at this ornate belt here, the implicit item would be the implicit item would be the 10% reduced charms used. On the chimeric mark there, the dual string bow, this is one of the mirror bows I crafted this league. It would be the bows fire an additional modifier. On the gold amulet, it would be the rarity of items found. Okay, the next type of categorization is a prefix. Prefixes are modifiers that focus on primary stats. Rare items can have up to 3 prefixes. Magic items may have up to 1. The only exception to this are jewels, which can have only a total of 4 affixes instead of 6, and therefore can only have 2 prefixes on rares and 1 on magic items. The only caveat to this is if you use a vol orb on them, it can actually add an additional modifier, and making the total 5, thus you would have potentially 3 of either one. Suffixes, conversely, are modifiers that focus on secondary stats. Rare items can have up to 3 suffixes, magic items up to 1. And again, the only exception to this are jewels with 4 and 2 and 1 on magic items. And again, also with the caveat of being corrupted. Alright, the next categorization is enchantment. And this is a modifier added to an item via specific methods that use the enchantment slot. This can be done with runes or soul cores on weapons or armor, or with distilled emotions on an amulet. Finally, we have corruptions. These are a special type of enchantment modifier that can only be applied from a vol orb. The overwhelming majority of your focus as a player will be given to the prefixes and suffixes of rare items. The specific combination of these modifiers will determine the strength, utility, and ultimately the value of any item you possess. So, if we look at the items we have on the page here, just going through to identify which is which, an affix would be anything that is below any line of text that is below the bows fire an additional modifier here. If you can see on the side here, it's a little cropped out on the screen, which I apologize for. These first 3 modifiers here, physical damage, the physical damage, and the physical hybrid are the prefixes, which you'll be seeing denoted on the side when you hold Alt. And then the next category with the suffixes would be the bottom three affixes here: the +2 arrow, the crit chance, and the attack speed. The enchantment on this would be the 40% increased physical damage, which will be coming from the runes, and it would have no corruptions. The corrupted modifier can be seen here on the Fletching Time Lost Emerald of Demolishing, with the corrupted blood cannot be inflicted on you. And the enchantment, as well as being on the Chimeric Mark, can also be observed here on the gold amulet with Allocate's Bestial Skin. Now, within every affix, there are various tiers or modifiers. There are various tiers of modifiers. These tiers are all tied to an item level, with the higher item level modifiers being with the higher item level modifiers being stronger within each modifier tier. Let me rewind here. I'm sorry, guys. I'm working a lot today. Sorry. Within every affix, there are various tiers of modifiers, and these tiers are all tied to an item level, with the higher item level modifiers being stronger within each modifier itself. Sometimes, however, lower item level modifiers can be stronger than higher item level modifiers when compared between two different affixes. Allow me to explain, because that's a little convoluted. If you were to click the increased elemental damage with attacks here, it would open up like this. And so within that, you can see that there are 6 separate tiers, with the weighting being the same for each one. However, the strength is improving on each. On the previous one, you can see this is a list of the total possible modifiers. So within an individual modifier itself, so within the modifier elemental damage with attacks, you are almost always going to have the strongest mod be the highest item level one. However, it is possible when comparing the affixes between two separate affixes, like if we were to compare fire damage to physical damage, it might be possible that the physical damage modifier might be stronger than the fire one, even though it could potentially have a lower item level. Now, another thing about these tiered modifiers is that they have internal weightings, and that will dictate how rare that modifier is in terms of how often it will show up on the item. The total availability of all of these modifiers on tiers are not presented anywhere in the game. Although, when you hover over an item and hold Alt, it will tell you the tier of a modifier on the right side of each affix. Third-party websites like Craft of Exile and PoE DB2 are used to see a complete list of modifiers and the amount of tiers within each modifier, as well as the item level requirement within each tier. Only on Craft of Exile will you be able to find the actual weights, however. Now, another thing to make note of, and this has actually been sort of a point that has made itself readily apparent on many of my videos. In Path of Exile 2, something to note is that the modifiers ascend in strength, with Tier 1 being the lowest. In PoE 1, the opposite was the case. Oh, sorry guys, didn't mean to zoom out there. In PoE 1, the opposite was the case. Tier 1 was the strongest possible tier of a modifier. This categorization was actually infinitely more sensible and easier to communicate, as it gave a universal way to understand the relative strength of any affixes on any given item. If you ever hear a PoE veteran, such as myself, refer to an item as 6T1, they mean that all of the modifiers are max tier. In PoE 2, for example, to do the same thing, every item would have different affixes, and each affix has a different amount of tiers. The resistance for PoE 1 using the new classification system is it because it provides no universal language in understanding what is on an item. For example, if we were to go back up to this bow from a couple slides ago, this is what I would refer to as 6 tier 1. But if I were to refer this bow in PoE terms, I would have to say it is T9, T8, T8, T2, T6, T5. In terms of the rarity with respect to the weights of each one of these modifiers, the lower weighted and thus the harder to get, The order of that would be T8, T2, T9, T6, T8, T5. Now, I furthermore have a wand, which I can show you here. I think you guys should be able to see it in the side. There we go. This is a mirror wand I crafted. Actually, the first 61 mirror wand made ever in PoE 2. But just to give you another example, the tiers on this are 8, 8, 12, 7, 6, and 5. If I were to sort those by rarity, 8, 8, 5, 7, 6, and 12. Not only is this a mouthful to communicate, but it also gives no relative understanding between items or between individual affixes as to which is a stronger or a higher mod. Furthermore, it has no application. Furthermore, it has no application to anything outside from the categorization of the mods, as crafting currencies use item levels, not tiers. The stupidity of this reclassification is most obvious when both John and Mark refer to tier 1 mods as being the highest when they discuss PoE 2. Again, these are the lead developers of Path of Exile 2. They always quickly catch the slip, but recognize the silliness of the switch and say that they will look into it in the future. Furthermore, if we take a look at Craft of Exile here, you can see that they still use the old tiering system, where it has tier 1 as being best, and in this case, tier 6 being the worst. If you're using the website and you're new to the game, do be aware of this. This quick tangent about tier classification has little bearing on you if you are a new player. However, since you're watching this video, you've expressed some interest in itemization or crafting, and since many people in PoE 2, especially content creators, played PoE 1, the communication of this tiering has probably, or will probably, be encountered by most of you at some point. It is unimportant with respect to items themselves, simply communicating the communication of those items. It is always best to ask for a link for any item in the game and hold Alt before hovering to check for yourself in case you're confused in the way that somebody is communicating something. But if you're not very experienced player or crafter, I do suggest that you always keep either Craft of Exile or PoE DB2 up while playing for reference. PoE DB2 does not show modifier weights, however, only Craft of Exile does. It should be noted, though, that the weights of modifiers modifiers on Craft of Exile are not data mined as they were in PoE 1, but rather they were gathered empirically. The details of this can be found on the website, that is craftofexile.com, and can be read by anyone who plans to use it, and I encourage you to do so before using it as a way to inform any of your crafts going forward, but the specifics of how the data was gathered are put there. All right, and another thing to quickly discuss here with respect to weights, because we did talk about how there are different tiers and there are different modifiers. The weighting system in PoE, if you want to calculate this yourself, if you look at any specific affix that you have and you were to open it up, you would be able to say the different tiers within that modifier itself. As you can see on the right side here, these will have a weight associated with them. If you look at the bottom on Craft of Exile, it will show you the total amount of modifiers, including all tiers that are available on that item, as well as their total weight. If you want to figure out, let's say you have a prefix open and you wanted to exalt tier 1 elemental damage with attacks, you could put that in on the program here and it would tell you it would take 68 exalts on average. This would also be reflected the same as if you were using an Omen of Whittling, but we can discuss that more when we get to the crafting side of things. But this is a way that it can be used and a way that can help you better understand the likelihood or probabilities of your crafts, or what risk you are potentially taking by making something, or just how rare the item that you have is. These are the two bows, the tiering system that I had mentioned here. If you look on the side, you can see the different tiering: tier 9, 8, 8, 2, 6, 5, 8, 8, 12, 7, 6, 5, and that doesn't make too much sense. But now that we've covered affixes and all the things that go into that, sorry, I don't like it when people send me invites. We're now going to get into the bulk of the crafting stuff. So, what is crafting? Crafting refers to the act of using currency items or certain game mechanics to modify the stats and modifiers of items. Almost all items can be crafted to change and enhance the item, with current exceptions. God damn. Sorry, there's somebody offering me 1 divine and 20 exalts there for a mirror item. In fact, I'm going to put myself on D&D. Sorry about that. Alright, almost all items can be crafted to change and enhance the item, with the current exceptions being corrupted and mirror items, which, because of their status as being corrupted or mirrored, cannot have normal crafting currencies or processes done to them. The exception of this being able to add runes and soul cores to their sockets. Crafting uses various chance-based and occasionally deterministic steps to create or to alter items and can be used at all levels of the game. The very best items in the game will always be crafted, and crafting can be done as soon as you start leveling. Possessing a baseline understanding of crafting in the game, therefore, is one of the most valuable skills that you can possess in Path of Exile. While Path of Exile 1 has a very rich crafting system involving over 18 different systems themselves or UIs, it has multiple different kinds of item specializations and over 100 different crafting currencies. PoE 2 comparably has a quite simple and streamlined system of crafting in place as of yet. It is worth noting, however, that the crafting systems in Path of Exile 1 were built upon themselves league over league, and at the early stages of the game, where PoE 2 is today, it looked like nothing like it does now. I would anticipate to some extent the same being the case for PoE 2. The best way to categorize the existent crafting mechanics and currencies in PoE 2 is by the impact that they have on items at various stages. Doing so, you will end up with 7 different categorizations of crafting or crafting currencies. Omens are a new crafting system or crafting item in Path of Exile 2 that improves upon the basic effect of other currency items. They too fall into these categorizations, but in of themselves they do nothing. Multiple omens impacting the same currency type can be used at once. It is also the most expensive form and the highest form of crafting, that is omen crafting. They have largely replaced, I would say, a mixture of the bench crafting system from Path of Exile 1, somewhat combined with the harvest crafting system. So the different categorizations that we have here are upgrading rarity, augmenting and removing modifiers, randomizing numerical values, quality, sockets, enchantments, and other or miscellaneous. So the first type of crafting systems that exist, or crafting items that exist, are the ones that can upgrade rarity. The first one of these being an Orb of Transmutation, which can upgrade a normal item into a magic item, and it will add 1 modifier. This 1 modifier can be either a prefix or a suffix. An Orb of Alchemy. This will upgrade a normal item into a rare item, and it will always add 4 modifiers. This is different than Path of Exile 1, where it could add 4, 5, or 6. Orb of Chance. It will either turn a normal item into a unique item of the same base type, or it will destroy the item entirely. The next one would be a Regal Orb. Upgrades a magic item into a rare one and adds 1 modifier. Typically, this will be 2 mods being upgraded into 3. The next thing that upgrades rarity is a Regular Essence. This will upgrade a normal item into a magic item, adding 1 tagged modifier. A Greater Essence. This will upgrade a magic item into a rare item, adding 1 tagged modifier similarly. Now, note, many modifiers in the game are tagged, which is an identifying system that categorizes similar modifiers into role-based groups. These tags cannot be seen in the game and must be viewed by consulting either PoE DB2 or Craft of Exile. Some examples of these tags are physical, chaos, caster, speed, defenses, etc. These tags are relevant for the use of both essences and catalysts. They provide a more deterministic way to craft with essences and allow for further scaling via quality with catalysts on both amulets and on rings. So if you take a look here on this example I put, you can see that physical damage here is tagged as physical and attack. While it also has this damage tag, damage is actually not something that you can ever target. The other relevant tags here, we would see physical and attack, cold attack and elemental, and then elemental, lightning, and attack. And various items will have these. Again, realistically, the most common thing you're going to need this for would be essence crafting. It is not nearly as important as it was in PoE 1, where this actually had a lot of functionality within the game with the use of both fossils and harvest crafting. But it is still somewhat relevant in PoE 2 and something you should definitely look into if you have not done it before. All right, and the final thing that we want to talk to here about upgrading rarity is a Vault Orb. Vault Orbs can corrupt maps into rares randomly, and also if they are used on a 2 modifier magic jewel, it can add an additional affix, turning it into a 3 modifier corrupted rare. Now, here are the omens that have been added to the game that augment or cause a new effect to be added to one of the rarity-related currency types. So, a Sinestral Alchemy causes the next used Alchemy Orb to add the maximum number of prefix modifiers. Since an Alchemy Orb will always add 4 mods, by doing an Omen of Sinestral Alchemy first, it will guarantee that that rare modifier or that rare item will be 3 prefixes and 1 suffixes. The Omen of Dextral Alchemy on the other side will do the same thing, but make it 3 suffixes and 1 prefixes. The Sinestral Coronation will cause the next Regal Orb to add a prefix modifier. Since a Regal Orb only adds 1 mod, that'll guarantee that. And conversely, the Dextral Coronation will cause the next Regal Orb to add a suffix modifier. As a point of note, when it comes to categorizing omens in general, the word Sinestral refers to prefixes and Dextral refers to suffixes. Aside from that, most of them just use the actual currency name thereafter, so they're not terribly hard to recognize, plus you can just hover over them. And they can be purchased from Alva as well, so they're not that difficult to get, their price at times notwithstanding. The next categorization, or the next kind of crafting class that we have for currency items or for systems in PoE 2 would be augmenting or removing modifiers. Augmenting refers to adding an explicit modifier to an item that does not change its rarity. Magic items have a default modifier limit of 2, with 1 prefix and 1 suffix, while almost all rare items have a default modifier limit of 6, with 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes. The exception to this, again, being rare jewels, which have a limit of 4, with 2 prefixes and 2 suffixes. These augmenting or removing modifiers can be done with the following currency types. An Orb of Augmentation. This will add an explicit modifier to a magic item, and that will only happen up until its rarity limit, which is 2. If a pre-existing magic item already has 1 prefix, your augment will always add 1 suffix, and if it already has 1 suffix, your augment will always add 1 prefix. An Exalted Orb adds an explicit modifier to a rare item up to its rarity limit, which is 6, on, again, every item but jewels. An Orb of Annulment will remove an explicit modifier from a magic or rare item without impacting the rarity. A Chaos Orb will remove an explicit modifier from a rare item without affecting the rarity, and then it will add an explicit modifier. If the item is not at its maximum modifier limit, a prefix can be removed and a suffix can be added, and vice versa. If the item is at its modifier limit, however, the removed modifier will always replace itself. So, for example, if you have a rare item with 4 mods, and let's say that is 3 suffixes and 1 prefix, if you use a Chaos Orb, it could remove a suffix and then add the mod as a prefix, thus making it 2 prefixes and 2 suffixes. However, if you have an item that is filled out with affixes, so it has 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes, if you use a Chaos Orb and it removes a suffix again, since the only item slot or the only affix slot that will be open is the one that it just removed, it will always replace itself. This is relevant in particular when you are trying to profit craft, or if you're scanning the auction house looking for things that are lucrative to craft with Chaos Orbs, or to purchase and then to try and YOLO, as it were, to improve that way. But also with your own crafts as well. Another way that we can augment or remove modifiers is with a Vault Orb. Corrupting an item has a chance to re-roll up to 3 random modifiers on both equipment and jewels. It can also add a modifier on jewels, as I mentioned earlier, which will allow them to exceed the maximum modifier limit, going from 4 to 5. There are lots of omens that are related to augmenting or removing modifiers, including the most expensive ones in the game. And so give me a second to get through this. The Omen of Greater Exaltation will cause your next Exalted to add 2 mods instead of 1. The Sinestral Exaltation will cause the next Exalted Orb to add a prefix. The Dextral Exaltation can cause the next Exalted Orb to add a suffix modifier. And you can combine the greater exalt with either the sinestral or the dextral to make them add either 2 prefixes or 2 suffixes. As I mentioned right when we started explaining these, you can use multiple omens at once as long as they affect the same currency item. So the next one is a greater annulment, which will cause the next orb of annulment to remove 2 mods. A sinestral annulment, which will cause it to remove a prefix. Dextral annulment, which will cause it to remove a suffix. And again, similar to the exalts, the greater annulment can be combined with either the sinestral or the dextral to remove 2 of the next prefix or suffix modifier. The omen of sinestral erasure causes the next used chaos orb to remove a prefix modifier. A dextral erasure causes the next chaos orb to remove a suffix modifier. Omen of whittling, which is probably the most unique currency item that they added and is absolutely the bread and butter of high-end crafting in this game as it exists right now, and perhaps the single most broken and deterministic item they have ever added to crafting in all of PoE's history. And the effect of it is as such. It will cause the next Chaos Orb to remove the lowest item level modifier. Now, an Omen of Whittling can be combined with either a Dextral or Sinestral Erasure, and you can use that to force remove and replace the next, the lowest item level either suffix or prefix. So if you familiarize yourself well with all those things that we talked about earlier, the tiers, the weights, the item levels, you keep your consultation up with Craft of Exile or with PoE DB2, you can get some really crazy stuff there. Every single one of the mirror items I have made has used a very significant amount of these final omens. All right, the next kind of currency types we're going to discuss are randomizing numerical values. These currency items will re-roll the numerical values of modifiers on items within the range designated by the modifier tier. A Divine Orb will randomize the numeric values of an item as allowed by its tier. This impacts explicit modifiers and implicit modifiers. If we are to, let me jump in the game for a second. If you take a look here on the Honor Stinger Expert dual string bow, we can see that the range of the first mod there is 170 to 179, and the next one 26 to 39, etc. Using a Divine Orb in this sense will change the values of this from anywhere that is pre-existing there. It does not change the tiers of the items, the modifiers. It does not re-roll the ranges or the tiers in any kind of way. It will only change it to the values that are existing on the item as it presents itself. And again, that also does apply to implicits in Path of Exile 2, which was not the case in Path of Exile 1 because you had Blessed Orbs. So in this case here, you can see the implicit is 10% attack speed. But the range on it is 7 to 10. Some implicits don't have a value range, like bow, fire, and additional arrow. There's no integer value to that. But on some of them, like the quiver here, it does have a range, and the Divine Orb will impact that as well. This makes it actually significantly harder, as you know, they exponentially get more difficult the more modifiers that you add with respect to trying to make them perfect. Now, getting back to the sheet here, the other thing that can do this are Vol Orbs. However, it can only happen on unique items. One of the possible outcomes of corrupting is to perform the roll of a Divine Orb on the item, following which it will then multiply the end result randomly within a range of times 0.78 to times 1.22. Doing this can exceed the upper limit of the modifier range on an uncorrupted unique item. The final landed value, if not a whole number, will be rounded up or down. Now, I know that's pretty confusing there, but I'll show you an item as an example in the game here. If we take a look at the Hands of Wisdom in action here, the Hawa, sorry, that tab's being blocked, we'll move it over. There we go. You can see that the normal range of dexterity is 15 to 25, and the same thing with the intelligence, as well as the int range normally being 1 to 10, and the attack speed being 3. However, if you look at the values that we have on this, it has been corrupted, and all 4 of these affixes have gone up positively. This is actually the second best Hawa to exist ever in PoE 2. But we can see that the dexterity is 3 points above perfect. The intelligence is 2 points above perfect, and the lightning damage flat has gone from 10 to 12, and the attack speed has gone from 3 to 4. Now, you'll note that 3 to 4 would be a times 1.33333, repeating, of course, Leroy, to actually get there. And one thing that is new in PoE 2 with respect to this is that it will actually round up in these situations, because 3 times 1.22 would be 3.66, and that 66 would get rounded up to 4. So that's how that's possible there. Now, the first thing that it does when you do a Vol Orb, and this can only apply on unique items, again, is that it would divine effectively the modifier within its pre-existing range, and then it would use that effect on it. So if you look at this belt, for example, Ingenuity, which has the 80% bonuses gained from equipped rings, there's not really too much of a reason to go for very well-rolled uniques if you're planning on using a Vol Orb on them afterwards, because the first thing it's going to do is divine it anyways. However, there's only a partial chance that it does this, as a Vol Orb, if not used with an Omen, can do one of three things, right? So if you do want to get an enchant, for example, you might want to get the upper range of the values. However, for most items, since it is going to do that divining performative function first, it doesn't particularly matter that much. Furthermore, if you want more details on how Vol Orbs work, I did actually publish a full video about it, and you can find that on my channel, and I'll link it down below in the description as well, and that'll give a full breakdown of how they work in much more specific detail. All right, so the next thing that you can craft with, a crafting currency type, is a quality item. So quality affects the certain inherent stats of an item. We did discuss this a little bit earlier, and the amount of quality gained on using quality currency depends on the item level of the item, or if the item is unique. The several types that impact quality here are armor scraps, which improve the quality on an armor piece, causing it to have upwards of 20% more base defenses. The next is a blacksmith whetstone, and that improves the quality of a martial weapon, causing it to have upwards of 20% more local physical damage. As a quick tangent here, and I didn't actually write this down, but there are two types of modifiers that you have to also understand, which are local and global. When you hear anything is local, it means that it affects to the stats on the item itself. And when you hear global, it means it impacts your character at large, right? So if you look at, like, say, for example, percentage physical damage on a bow, that is going to increase the flat values on the weapon itself. Whereas if you were to get percentage increased global physical damage, that would be after, if you were doing a physical spell, that would apply to that. But also your base physical value that is presented by the bow itself would get multiplied by your increased damage sources additively together. And that is where the increases from global will come. But the TLDR of this, especially if you're new, is if you see local, it means it applies to the item itself, and global means it applies to your character at large. Okay, and then the next currency item here is a Arcanist Etcher. That will improve the quality of a caster weapon, which will impact the inherent skill quality. A bauble, or glass bars bauble, frequently just referred to as baubles, improves the quality of a flask, causing it to recover more mana or life per second. GCP, or a Gem Cutter's Prism. This will improve the quality of a gem by 5%, upwards of 20%. Catalysts, as well, can improve the quality of rings and amulets, giving upwards of 20% increased value to the modifiers of the tagged affixes as determined by the catalyst type. And then lastly, we have Vol Orbs. Vol Orbs have a chance to add or remove quality on caster weapons, gems, flasks, and charms. Yeah, it can remove up to 10%. However, when it is adding quality, it can exceed the maximum value normally available on uncorrupted items of 20%, and it can go up to 23%. The fifth currency item, or fifth kind of crafting type, are ones that add sockets. These currency items add sockets to their respective items. Skill gems can have up to 5 sockets for support gems, or other skill gems if it is a meta gem. Martial weapons and armor can have sockets, with two-handed martial weapons and body armor allowing for 2, and one-handed martial weapons, helmets, boots, gloves, foci, and shields allowing for 1. The currency items associated with this are lesser, greater, and perfect jeweler's orbs that add a gem socket to a skill gem, causing it to have 3, 4, or 5 sockets respectively. And the artificer's orb, which will add a socket to an item as allowed by the item type, with the item types that are allowed to have it being the ones we just listed. Lastly, a vol orb. Excuse me. Oh, sorry. Excuse me. Holy cow. I am sorry, YouTube. Vol orb. Corrupting an item. Wow. Corrupting an item can add a socket to a armor or martial weapon in excess of the limit afforded by that item type. Item with 2 socket maximums can be corrupted to have 3 sockets. Similarly, 1 socket items can be corrupted to have a maximum of 2. Gems can also be corrupted to have an additional socket. However, unlike equipment, this socket count cannot exceed its normal maximum limit. So you can corrupt a gem that has 4 sockets into one with 5, but you cannot corrupt a gem with 5 sockets into one with 6. Alrighty. Now, we're going to talk about enchantments, the 6th type of item. The 6th type of crafting/crafting currency. Enchants. These currency items add enchantments to an item, which are wholly separated from either explicit or implicit modifiers. These are done through runes, which can be inserted into an item's socket. The effect of the runes vary based on which rune is used, and they can be switched at any time. Upon release, this was not actually the case, and they were permanent, but they decided to switch that in 1.1, and so now you can freely switch the runes or the soul cores as you choose. A soul core works the same as runes. However, they typically have more rare and sort of valuable modifiers. We can see the soul cores on the top left here and the different types of runes on the bottom left. The next type are distilled emotions. Instilling a combination of 3 distilled emotions adds or replaces an enchant on an amulet that will grant a notable passive skill. Instilling a combination of 1 to 3 emotions adds or replaces an enchantment that adds layers of delirium and reward modifiers on a waystone. Lastly, a vol orb. Corrupting an item has a chance to add a special corrupted only enchant to equipment and jewels. We have seen a few of these, but let's see if we can find one here. Looking in the inventory there, we can see here, corrupted blood is a corrupted enchant. However, if we look at, let's say, this mirror amulet, we can see Wild Storm, which is one of the ones given by the distilleds, which gives us the notable. Looking at this, we can see that we have the runes, which are giving us the 40% increased physical damage locally. And on this one, we have soul cores, which are giving us 24% to critical damage bonus. And again, that is also local. All right. And we are bound down to our final type of currency items or crafting mechanisms that exist on the basic level. These are the other/miscellaneous. Now, I'm going to throw vol orbs in here, even though I did cover them for most of these. Vol orbs have such a wide variety of different impacts on items based on the item type, and not all of the outcomes of vol orbs were discussed here. As I mentioned earlier, however, I posted a video sharing all of them a couple of weeks ago after PoE 2 launched. I'll put a link again of that video in the description for those of you who are interested, or if you'd like to find out what else they can do to your items. Vol orbs also have an omen that is associated with them. The omen of corruption you can see on the upper right there. All this does in PoE 2, don't think of it as like double corrupting if you're familiar with PoE 1. All it does in PoE 2 is that it removes do nothing as an option when you click a vol orb. In effect, if you do an omen of corruption and then click a vol orb and apply it to an item, something will always happen. That's the TLDR. And then, again, we get to the big boy, and one that I'm going to talk about for a minute here. The only other item that I couldn't really categorize in the type of crafting I couldn't categorize was a Mirror of Calandra. How suitable that the only crafting item unable to be categorized is the most iconic and rare in the game. It is also a part of the Path of Exile logo. So what does a mirror do? A mirror creates an exact copy of an item, and then it will reflect the artwork. So if you see an item that is inverted, or it looks like it is facing the wrong way, that item is likely mirrored. Furthermore, it will add the mirrored tag to the copy. An item tagged in such a way cannot be further augmented or modified in any way, with the exception of being able to add and remove runes and soul cores. The original item does not get tagged and can be repeatedly mirrored if desired. Since a Mirror of Kalandra is the rarest currency item in the game, and one of, if not the rarest of all items in the game, its use is typically limited to perfectly crafted items. These items are referred to as mirror items, and they are the strongest and most expensive items in the game to make and to play with. They are the pinnacle of crafting and the pinnacle of min-maxing, if that is something you want to get into in terms of character progression. They often cost thousands and thousands of divines or handfuls or dozens of mirrors to make. Creating these items is what I am known for. I have done so more than any other person in the history of Path of Exile. The most expensive craft I have done in PoE 2 was a mirror bow, the one I have shown you a couple times now, which totaled 24 mirrors, or if you were to take the value of mirrors and divines at their current market prices, over 20,000 divines. Those who craft on such items will often allow other players to use their Mirror of Kalandra on the crafted item, creating an exact copy of it for a small fraction of the price it took to make. The person who crafted the item will then exchange the copy that they made to the player who gave them the Mirror of Kalandra, and they will agree upon a fee to be paid to the crafter, and they'll make that, obviously, that decision prior to doing the exchange between the recipient and the crafter. This process is called mirror service. When looking on the trade website, if you see a perfect 6 tier 1, or if you refuse to accept that nomenclature, the 6 max tier item that is nearly perfectly divined and it is listed for 1 mirror, it is likely an item up for mirror service. This has been a long-standing practice since Path of Exile 1. Due to the incredibly high cost and difficulty of making mirror items, there are typically very few people who do it. Over time, these people concentrate into groups, guilds, or become content creators. The visibility afforded by these groups allow them to become trusted sources to perform this service, as the reputational backlash that would be suffered from scamming even one person would decimate their in-game business model. If you are ever using someone's mirror service, make sure they are someone with a long history of doing so, as there are plenty of people who would happily steal that mirror without a second thought. This part of the game, referred to as mirror crafting, is the pinnacle of itemization in Path of Exile 2 as well as in 1. Certain crafts can be incredibly lucrative, and when done properly, this is by far the best currency generating strategy in the game. It has a very high upfront cost and demands a lot of time and effort, but once completed, becomes a passive income source permanently until a better item or until new affixes are available. In PoE 2, I have made over 30 mirrors so far from servicing these types of crafts. In Path of Exile 1, the most I ever made in a single 3-month or 4-month league just from mirror services was in Crucible, where I made 1,338 mirrors. Because of the extreme level of currency that is exchanging hands in mirror crafting and mirror servicing, this is one of the most fraudulent and RMT, real money trading, driven parts of the game, on both the demand and the supply side. I would highly recommend avoiding this part of the game unless you are fully aware of the factions at play and the risks that are associated with it. Furthermore, I heavily suggest that you do not RMT. I've noticed that a lot of the new players that are coming to the game seem to think it's acceptable because it seems fairly commonplace. However, it is against the terms of service, and while it is rampantly happening in PoE 2 right now, you will eventually get caught for it, and you will be banned as a result. And you know what? Maybe you won't. But you really want to risk it? This illicit activity, furthermore, ruins the economy for others, and it will likely take away the fun from the game for you. $1 earned is always going to be more rewarding than $1 stolen, or $1 given to you. The goal of this video, and this channel at large, is to help you learn different ways to do that, legally and sustainably within the game. Hopefully you can have a whole bunch of fun doing so, like I have for so many years now. That covers the different types of crafting currencies. Now we're going to discuss the various crafting benches and vendors that exist in PoE 2. These are interactable objects that provide a variety of different crafting options. However, these are used far less commonly than currency items and have a much diminished role as compared to bench crafting in PoE 1. In fact, I've basically done none of this. But the crafting benches / vendors that exist are Gwenin, who is an expedition vendor. She offers specially crafted weapons, quivers, and foci. Rog, as you can see on the left here, also an expedition vendor, offers specially crafted armors and shields. Chujin, who is on the right, offers specially crafted jewelry. There is also the salvage bench here on the right side, which converts armor or weapons with quality or sockets into their respective currencies. And the reforging bench. The reforging bench is the only one of these that really I've taken a decent level of interest in. And what a reforging bench does is that it will destroy 3 items of the same base type and rarity into a new unidentified item of the same rarity and type. The new item will be the item level of the lowest of the 3 original items. The bench can also be used to upgrade or randomize certain items. Distilled emotions and waystones can all be upgraded to +1 tier if you put them in 3-1. Essences and catalysts can be exchanged 3-1 for a new random result. There is a small chance when using regular essences 3-1 that will give a greater essence back. Putting 3 greater essences in, however, will not always guarantee that you get back a random greater essence. I highly recommend avoiding this with the greater essences. I've always got burned when I've tried. However, approximately 1 in 20 times, if I put regular essences in 3-1, I've got back a greater one. The last kind of bench that you have, and I'm not even going to add a photo of this because it's so unimportant, but technically there is the corruption altar in Jinquani's Sanctum. This is only found while leveling, and it can only be used once per difficulty to corrupt an item. It works functionally the exact same as a Vol Orb, but Vol Orbs are like 10-1 Exalt, so they're incredibly cheap. So I wouldn't bother chasing this down in any kind of way unless you come across it organically while making your way through the axe while leveling. Alright, now, these are the different crafting items and systems as they exist in place in Path of Exile 2 right now. What we are aiming to do through these typically is one of 3 goals. We would like crafting to accomplish one of these at all times, and that is that we are looking to make items in the most cost-effective, time-efficient, and deterministic way possible. By using these different crafting currencies and crafting mechanics, we can find clever ways to do so to increase our outcomes or to compare that to the marketplace at large, using the trade site as a baseline comparison. If you understand your material costs, your probabilities, and the sale price of your desired outcome, you can pretty much quantify any action that you make with respect to crafting. And if you do that in large sizes, it is a very, very profitable and very consistent way to make money through the game. There are essentially 3 different avenues one can go with crafting, and these would be, I would say, profit crafting, crafting for self-use, and then min-max crafting. Min-max crafting would have 2 subcategories, which would be mirror crafting, and then also endgame or min-maxing crafting. So let's say, for example, if you're to take a look at like this bow, and you know, this ring and amulet and quiver and wand and all that stuff, those are all mirror items, right? However, Hand of Wisdom in Action, for example, this is much better than any rare glove that I could use, and for many builds it is the case. Now, making this is not mirror crafting, but it is still quite rare, and the process of making this, for example, would be min-max crafting. Similarly with these jewels here, you know, where we have like the, you know, the perfectly divined, very, very rare 7/7 timeless jewel made to be used with the adorned with 100% increased effect, which would, you know, now give us 14% increased bonuses from quivers for each notable passive and 20% crit bonus for a notable passive. Things like that, where, you know, it's often going to be corrupted items or some variant thereof, or perhaps with uniques, but that would be the min-max kind of crafting side of things. But getting back to the points here, that pretty much concludes the breakdown of all the crafting currencies and mechanics, as well as a brief overview of what crafting is and what itemization is in Path of Exile 2 at the moment. The process of crafting items, in my opinion, is one of the most rewarding and fun parts of the game. It is also a skill set that many people do not possess, and thus those who are willing to understand its nuances or how to parse through valuable items, whether they are found through killing mobs or found through the trade site and purchased from another player, will have a tremendous asymmetrical advantage over their peers. The basics of reading an item, as we first discussed with itemization, is a central skill in every facet of the game, regardless of what your preferred style of play or focus is. Limited stash space or inventory space and portals make item management an important feature of mapping, and knowing which base types, modifiers, item levels, crafting currencies, and steps to take to reach the desired outcomes is entirely the focus of crafting, as we mentioned. While we have discussed the basic elements of itemization and the various mechanisms by which one can create or alter items through the process we colloquially refer to as crafting, we have not yet discussed anything to do with strategy. When to use various crafting currencies, when to graduate to omens, how to spot valuable modifier combinations on trade, what constitutes a mirror item, how to snipe items that are incomplete, but they can be fixed and finished off on the trade site. How do you price check items correctly? When should you keep crafting? And when should you sell items that you have started crafting? How and when to item level restrict different base types to improve your crafting odds. How to know when to use more expensive crafting currencies like essences or basic, using essences versus, let's say, a basic cheaper currency. So how do you know when to use a greater essence versus a regal, especially if you're not really sure what the EV is there. In fact, we can also discuss how do you calculate EV? What is expected value? How does that play into it? There are amongst other strategic goals and mechanical nuances. If you guys enjoyed this introductory video and breakdown, I am very much hoping to make this into a series with progressive information that builds upon the previous videos. The topics mentioned above and many, many more are ideas that I have for future installments of this series. If you are interested, please let me know by liking this video, leaving a comment, subscribing to the channel, and sharing with a friend. I put a tremendous amount of effort into this and will continue to do so going forward if it is well received. The script alone took me over 16 to 18 hours, spread between 3 separate days to write, at the expense of streaming time, without factoring in the PowerPoint or visual aids or the time to record, edit, and post. I can give that amount of time and effort to these videos and future ones if they do well, and it is thanks to viewers like you guys that happens. Thank you very much for watching, for subscribing, and for helping me to continue along in this dream of mine. God bless, gentlemen, and as always, let me know if you have any questions in the comments. I apologize while going through this that I stumbled a few times today. I have been doing this for about 17 hours straight now. In fact, I worked overnight, over the course of the night, 2 p.m. now. I've been working since last night at 10 p.m. So I think I'm just a little tired and perhaps the blue light's getting to me a bit. I'll try to be more eloquent next time. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope to see you soon. Let me know what you guys think, and I hope this helped. Take care, fellas.